That night, beneath the mirror-bright chandeliers of the Broadmoor ballroom, my future son-in-law raised a champagne flute and told 420 guests that I was just some low-grade laborer, a blue-collar embarrassment. The laughter that followed hit like metal dropped on tile. Cold, sharp, deliberate. I stood there in my faded flannel, under the hot lights, and realized some slaps don't need a hand. Just a sentence. If you've ever felt your heart stop for a beat, because someone who should have respected you chose instead to belittle you, leave a single, so I know you're here with me, and tell me what city you're listening from. If you believe hands stained with grease can outshine a whole room of people laughing at your pain, hit follow and turn on notifications. This story is for you. I used to think some words only lived in the dark, but that night, under Broadmoor's crystal lights, they sliced through the air like glass. That's just my wife's father. Just a factory laborer. A blue-collar embarrassment. Ryan's voice, my future son-in-law's voice, cut through the elegant quiet like he was flicking ash into his own wine glass. 420 guests in their cocktail glow turned at once toward me. The man in the faded blue work shirt, the old flannel jacket, the boots still stained with oil. The amber light from the chandeliers poured over my shoulders like an unwanted spotlight. At the Broadmoor, everything shines, crystal, linens, polished smiles, curated elegance, everything except me, a dark flicker in a room full of polished people. In that moment, even the silverware paused. A martini slipped from someone's hand and hit the thick carpet with a dull thud. Not broken, the Broadmoor uses good carpet, but loud enough to draw more eyes. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Silence. Complete silence. Ryan didn't stop. He swirled his champagne, leaned closer to the man beside him, a man I didn't recognize. But by the custom-tailored suit and the aerospace division lapel pin, I understood exactly who Ryan was trying to impress. He works at some steel plant in Boulder. Factory line. You know the type. Ryan said it with a half laugh, half sneer, as if marrying my daughter was an achievement above his class that deserved applause. A cold thread crawled down my spine, though the room was warm from the heaters. When I looked around, I saw what Ryan didn't. A guest in the far corner raising his phone, camera pointed straight at us. A moment like that would outlive any wedding. Whispers spread like paper cuts. That's the bride's father. He really said that out loud? God, in front of everyone? I breathed in slowly, catching the scent of polished wood and white orchids. I'm used to the smell of machine oil, hot steel, sweat in a factory. Not this strange mix of luxury cut by the smell of humiliation. I could have answered him. Could have corrected every lie Ryan told about me. But I didn't. Silence. I held it like a tool Ryan had no idea how to wield. But I did. Noise is what small men use. Real authority is knowing how long you can stay quiet. I turned and walked away slowly, letting my shadow fall along the cream-colored walls. People stepped aside, not out of respect, but confusion. They didn't know whether to pity me or avoid me. I let them look. Let them wonder why a man who was just insulted in front of hundreds wasn't shrinking. Let them wonder what they didn't know. A hand touched my shoulder just as I reached the far end of the ballroom. I turned. It was the stranger, the man Ryan tried so hard to impress. He looked at me for a long moment. No pity, no shock, something else. Recognition. He whispered one small question, barely above breath. Your name is Calder? I didn't answer. He already knew. I saw it in his eyes. At the exact moment the ballroom lights shifted brighter for the couple's entrance, a cold ripple traced down my spine. Ryan thought he stood on top of a social pyramid. He didn't know what that pyramid was built from, or who actually stood at the top. I walked away, silent, still silent, but in my mind every gear had begun to turn. I saw the stranger nod, just once, the nod of a man who had recognized I was not the factory embarrassment Ryan assumed. A guest? who happened to be an executive from one of the largest contractors of Calder Industrial Technologies. And Ryan had just ended his life right in front of him. Some nights, after the insult at the Broadmoor, I'd lie in my small room in Fort Collins, listening to the old heater click on and off, and my mind would drift 20 years back, to Boulder Steelworks, where the heat scorched your lungs and metal clanged like thunder. I was 30 then, younger, stronger, and far poorer. I clocked in at 5 a.m., staggered out close to midnight, and some weeks, every day was the same. 18 hours surrounded by screaming rollers, the smell of red-hot steel and metallic dust coating my skin like a second hide. My coworkers used to joke that if you cut me, my blood would shine silver like the steel we made. One June morning, the shift began like always. 93 degrees outside, close to 140 inside. I stood on line 4 inspecting a steel slab coming off the rollers. The machine screeched wrong. I turned, didn't even have time to see it, before a 3-meter slab slipped off alignment and dropped exactly where I was standing. Everything happened in less than a second. I only heard someone scream, "Sam, back up!" before the whole corner of the shop went dark. If my foot had been half a step slower, they would have carried me out in a black bag. I hit the floor, shoulders smashing a tool chest. The impact knocked the breath out of me, but the sound of steel slamming into the concrete beside my head still chills me to this day. Miguel, the old Mexican mechanic, was the one who dragged me clear. Later, he gave me a beaded charm he'd made, said it would keep death off my shoulders. He claimed I had hands that refused to die. I thought it was just the luck of a poor man who can't afford death. Dying costs money when you're broke. That near miss was the first moment I realized I couldn't stay there forever. I still had Jessica, she was 4 then, and I'd promised my wife, before she passed, that our daughter wouldn't repeat our life. I had no degree, no pedigree, nothing except calloused hands and the growing certainty that if I didn't carve another path, my life would be nothing but the sound of steel rollers until the end. The opportunity came in the shape of a man in a blue work shirt, smelling of machine oil, Carter Ellis, the owner of a small mechanical parts startup in Loveland. He'd come to the steel mill looking for someone who understood industrial machinery, and when he heard me talk about cold steel, thermal expansion, and how to adjust die molds to reduce defects, he stared at me for a long time. Walking out to the parking lot, he finally said only one sentence. "If you ever want to do more than stand next to a roller press, call me." I didn't call right away. Being a laborer was all I knew. Stepping outside that narrow safety zone was terrifying. But after the second accident, when my wrist got caught in the slide track, I started thinking seriously. Jessica was 6 by then, and I remember her asking, "Daddy, why do your hands always hurt?" That question hit me harder than any steel slab could. In 2004, I scraped together every dollar I had, plus what I got from selling my old Chevy, exactly $50,000. I took it to Carter. He looked at the envelope, then at me, and asked, "You know this money could disappear, right?" I said, "I know. But if I don't do something, my life disappears anyway." He laughed, signed the papers, and put me into the role that would eventually become the foundation of Calder Industrial Technologies. The startup grew. First a $180,000 contract, then $1.2 million, then $6 million. 3 years later, when Carter wanted to expand into industrial equipment for aerospace, he asked if I had the guts to go with him. I signed without hesitation. I became a co-owner, not because I had an MBA or slick presentation skills, but because I understood every bolt, every torque line, every stress path in the machines we built. But I didn't tell anyone. Not a single soul. To the outside world, I was still Sam, the former mill worker driving a 2011 Tacoma, buying parts at Home Depot and fixing my own roof. I felt peace in that simplicity. Money didn't make me want to change who I was, it just made me quieter. Then Jessica brought Ryan home. The first day we met, he shook my hand the way someone does when they've never tightened a bolt in their life. Soft, overly polite, a little cautious. My oil-stained fingers brushed his dress shirt, and I saw the quick flick of his eyes downward, that tiny, unmistakable flash of discomfort. 1 second was all I needed to understand the type of man he was. Someone who believed, worth lived, in the fabric he wore. When they got engaged, Ryan started making those accidental comments. Maybe you should try a blazer to look more professional. Maybe don't talk about the mill too much. It doesn't really fit. For the engagement party, could you not drive the Tacoma? We hired a pretty upscale valet. I smiled, didn't answer, but I stored every word. Then one March afternoon, Jess asked me to meet for coffee in Old Town Fort Collins. She sat down, fiddled with the paper sleeve on her cup, and said something I never thought I'd hear from my own daughter. Dad, maybe don't drive the Tacoma to the rehearsal dinner. I just want everything to look consistent. I didn't speak for several seconds. Seconds that felt longer than 20 years beside steel rollers. My little girl didn't mean to hurt me, but Ryan did, and his shadow always fell across her voice. I put my hand over hers and told her I'd think about it. But inside, I knew. It wasn't the truck she felt ashamed of. It was the way Ryan had reshaped her view of me. That night, when I left the cafe, I saw Ryan 2 storefronts away, leaning on his brand-new silver Porsche Taycan, watching me with that half-pity, half-warning expression. He had no idea that in the pocket of my old flannel jacket, I still carried Miguel's beaded charm, the one that kept me alive in the mill, the one that kept me steady through heat, steel, and near death, and the one that would keep me calm until the day Ryan finally broke under the weight of his own arrogance. That night, after the coffee meeting with Jessica, I realized something every father fears. There are moments when your child no longer speaks with her own voice. She speaks with the voice of the person she loves, the person she trusts, the person slowly taking over every corner of her life, including the corner that once belonged to the father who carried her on his arms, stained with machine grease. Ever since the engagement, Ryan had begun a quiet but unmistakably deliberate campaign, removing me from everything related to the wedding, not by banning me outright, but through a string of explanations that sounded reasonable enough that anyone with slightly dull instincts might think he was being helpful. Dad, the venue selection is complicated. Let us and the finance people handle it. The guest list needs a networking strategy. You're not familiar with that circle. Catering is crucial. We need menus that align with the investment crowd. The investment crowd. He used that phrase at least 10 times in the first week. One evening I stopped by their place, a small penthouse in the Denver Tech Center. Ryan stood at the kitchen island, pouring red wine into crystal glasses like he was signing a multi-million-dollar contract. He angled his wrist just enough for the Rolex Submariner to catch the light. The ceiling lamps hit the sapphire crystal face and threw off a shine meant to say, "I'm up here, you're down there." When I entered, he gave me a polite smile, the kind where the mouth moves but the respect doesn't. "You made it," he said, then turned to Jessica. "Show your dad the reception layout. I've got a quick meeting with North Rock Capital." North Rock Capital, the name he tossed around like a key card to every room he wanted to be invited into. As Jessica showed me the wedding concepts on her iPad, Ryan walked off, calling back casually, "Oh, Jess, remind your dad not to stand near the photo booth at the engagement party. Oil smell on the orchid backdrop would be awkward." A sentence that pretends to be accidental but hits like a steel plate falling sideways. I turned and looked straight at him. He paused, shrugged. "I mean, no one in finance wants to smell motor oil. Doesn't fit the vibe." He said it plainly. His world had no space for the scent of hard work. One line revealed everything he tried to hide under $1,000 suits. A deep insecurity lacquered over with arrogance. Jessica tugged his sleeve, trying to soften it. "He didn't mean it, Dad. He just wants everything to look cohesive." Like before, I didn't answer. But I saw the flicker in Ryan's eyes, the tiny settling of someone who believes he's just confirmed what he always thought, that I'm something to conceal. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, while he was dismissing me, I had already quietly paid $38,000 for the florist and the upgraded bar package, so my daughter could have the wedding she dreamed of. I didn't want Jess to shrink her happiness for a man like Ryan. I paid through a satellite account tied to Calder Tech. No one knew, no one needed to. I did it for Jess, for no one else. 2 days later, I went to the florist's office in Cherry Creek to sign some additional documents. It was an upscale place where orchids were treated like stock shares. I walked in wearing my usual work clothes. No one paid attention. I preferred it that way. But when I asked for the invoice to review the final charges, the receptionist typed for a moment, then smiled pleasantly. "Yes, Mr. Calder. The invoice is fully settled. Paid by Ryan Archer." I froze. 1 second. 2. 3. "Could you double-check that for me?" She turned the screen. The payer name was there, added at 7:46 p.m. the night before. In the notes was a line. Payer name updated per client phone confirmation. Ryan had called, told them to replace my name with his because he was handling all financial responsibilities. Florists are used to that kind of request. They accepted it without question, exactly when Ryan told Jessica he had a meeting with North Rock Capital. I knew precisely what he'd been doing. Not meeting, not planning, but erasing. Not building a wedding, building a narrative. Changing the invoice so that every compliment about the flowers, the decor, the elegance would tie back to him. I stared at paid by Ryan Archer and felt something small, small as a screw hitting a steel floor, but enough to signal that a part of me had just switched on. Not anger, not hurt. A cold, clear awareness. I thanked the receptionist, stepped outside, and looked at Ryan's silver Porsche Taycan parked under a tree. Sunlight glinted off the paint, shining like a never-ending brag. Ryan thought removing my name would erase my worth, but some values don't live on invoices. Values that don't depend on signatures. Values that only wait for the right moment to speak. That night, when the florist emailed the final confirmation, I noticed one extra line the receptionist hadn't mentioned. Original payer information changed by request. Request made by R. Archer. At the exact time he was in a meeting. That's when I knew this wasn't thoughtlessness. This was a declaration of war. 2 days after the invoice incident, I drove to Calder Industrial Technologies in Loveland. Not for anything urgent, just to check the new test line and sign a few documents with Carter Ellis. I still preferred taking my old Tacoma, even though the company parking lot was packed with the shiny SUVs our younger engineers liked to finance on salaries they barely understood. I walked into the lobby, the familiar scent of hydraulic oil mixing with the faint smell of coffee from the automatic machine. A normal morning, except it became the beginning of a chain of discoveries that made me realize Ryan hadn't just insulted me. He had stepped directly onto a trap he didn't know I was holding the line to. After finishing the paperwork, Patricia, our CFO, walked into the small conference room carrying a thick stack of files. Hair tied back, black-rimmed glasses, the face of someone who can tell who's lying just by reading a spreadsheet. "Sam, I need to talk to you about North Rock's aerospace portfolio," she said. I tilted my head. "Something wrong?" "Not exactly, but a few small irregularities." She handed me North Rock's quarterly competency report for their aerospace management team. I usually skimmed, but this time my eyes stopped on one line. AVP, Aerospace Mid-Market, Ryan Archer, newly promoted. Technical background, limited. Industry experience, low-moderate. Risk note, monitor for the first 6 months due to lack of core technical knowledge. I stared at newly promoted and limited, not because I was surprised, because it proved exactly what I already knew. I'd spent 20 years working beside red-hot steel. I could read men the way I read a metal gauge. Ryan carried himself like someone who memorized a few financial buzzwords, but had no idea what makes aerospace manufacturing real. Torque loads, vibration tolerance, composite fatigue, shear strength, things that determine whether a product from a company like Calder Tech actually flies. And Northrock gave someone like him a slice of our portfolio? I sat down and opened the rest of the report. He's part of the analyst group that recently moved to VP, Patricia said. I noticed because he's managing one of our contracts. I nodded. I understand. What I understood wasn't Northrock's reasoning. What I understood was that Ryan's arrogance far outweighed his ability, and he had no idea he was standing in front of someone who was not just Jessica's father, not just a former steelworker, but a co-owner of Northrock's largest aerospace client. When Patricia left, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A video. Uncle Sam, I recorded this at the wedding. Thought you should see it. I tapped play. The video shook slightly the way quick phone videos do, but the audio was sharp as a knife. Ryan standing with a circle of finance VPs murmuring, "He's embarrassing, seriously, look at him. That flannel? That truck? My God." A laugh, glasses clinking, and Jessica's forced chuckle, the tiny, brittle kind meant to hide humiliation she didn't deserve. I didn't watch it twice. I didn't have to. I closed the screen and set the phone down. Ryan had always sneered at the smell of machine oil, but hearing him call me embarrassing, right after erasing my name from an invoice so he could steal credit, created a strange sensation inside me. Not anger, not hurt, but a long, cold quiet. The kind of quiet right before a large engine turns over. By the time I got home, it was dark. The streetlight glinted off the scratched hood of my Tacoma. I'd barely stepped into the kitchen when my phone buzzed again, this time an email from Northrock Capital, marked High Priority Client Communication. Subject, Client Risk Review, Request for Information. I opened it. Short, precise. Cold enough that even someone outside the finance world would know this wasn't routine. No, this was the kind of email they send when they're afraid of losing a client, big enough to dent their quarterly report. Northrock Capital requests a risk review regarding the aerospace mid-market account. Please confirm whether you wish to continue having the account managed under VP Ryan Archer. I read it twice, then a third time. Outsiders might think it was administrative, but I knew exactly what it meant. In finance, a client risk review isn't about evaluating the client. It's a polite way of asking, do you still want this employee? Say one word, just one, and his career's over. Northrock couldn't risk losing us. Calder Industrial Technologies wasn't a small account. We were one of the largest aerospace contracts in their mid-market division, a steady, reliable revenue source, critical enough that even a hint of dissatisfaction could trigger emergency board meetings. Ryan didn't know that. He didn't understand that the aerospace portfolio he managed was the lifeline of the division he worked in, that a single email from me, or even a vague comment like "service has declined," could force Northrock to launch a full internal investigation, replace entire management structures, or bury him in some low-impact department no one ever thinks about. And he especially didn't understand that in this small house, under the warm kitchen light falling across the same hands, that once pulled me away from falling steel, tightened bolts to raise my daughter and signed the contracts that built Calder Tech, sat not a blue-collar embarrassment, but the co-owner of a company worth hundreds of millions, the very company his employer depended on. He thought that night at the Broadmoor was just one moment where he lifted himself by pushing me down. But life doesn't work like that. Some pushes, ones that feel harmless, are the exact shove that sends the one who delivered them straight off the ledge they never noticed. I leaned back in my kitchen chair, the light catching the ridges on my hands, hands that had saved me from steel, fed my family, and built a business from nothing. And I knew this email was the first signal, the first fracture, the first hairline crack in a collapse Ryan had no power to stop. That night, snow blanketed the porch roof, each flake falling so slowly it seemed to cling to the window frame before melting. I sat alone in the kitchen, the warm yellow lamp casting a tilted shadow across the old wooden table. On my phone screen, North Rock's client risk review email was still open, the cold phrasing sharp enough to slice through the still air. I thought the night would pass quietly. But at 12:47 a.m., my phone began to buzz. The name on the screen, Ryan Archer. 3 missed calls. The 4th call came before I could take a breath. I answered. Ryan's voice came through without a greeting, just the sound of breathing laced with alcohol, and that counterfeit confidence young finance men mistake for actual power. Sam, he said, dragging out the S like he was tasting some overpriced liquor he thought only his kind had the right to appreciate. I want you to understand, you don't belong in this world. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the front yard where my Tacoma sat under a thin sheet of snow. I said nothing. I let him talk, like I always had. I already made it clear, Ryan continued, his voice smooth and polished, like the surface of a freshly detailed Porsche. Your level. I don't know who made you think you get a say in anything involving us. He inhaled sharply, then slipped into the patronizing tone he reserved for people he believed were beneath him. You should know your place, Sam. Factory men don't belong here. People like you should stay behind your own line. That sentence hit the quiet kitchen like a metal plate dropping onto hot steel, sparking for an instant, then leaving only coldness behind. I reached over and turned on the call recorder. Colorado is a one-party consent state. I was that party. Ryan's voice grew smoother, as if he had rehearsed this speech in the mirror. I manage the biggest portfolio in my group. I got promoted because I deserve it. I drive a Porsche Cayenne, and I have an Ivy League degree. I go places, men, as you will never set foot in. There was a brief pause, the kind only arrogant men make when they believe their words are powerful enough to make someone fold. Then, if you keep getting involved in my relationship with Jess, you'll only embarrass yourself more. This world doesn't tolerate grease and oil. People at my level don't look at men like you. My hand on the table felt colder than usual, not from anger. I was used to this kind of contempt. But because I knew what Ryan had just given me wasn't an insult, it was a gift, a piece of evidence, a puzzle piece I never asked for, but one he delivered straight into my hands. Are you even listening? Ryan snapped, irritated that my silence didn't bend the way he expected. I closed my eyes and let out the kind of slow breath the steel mill had taught me. Steady, controlled, cold enough to make metal contract. My voice was soft, very soft, but clear enough for him to hear every word. I understand now, Ryan. He froze, not because he understood. He didn't, but because he didn't expect the man he insulted to respond without flinching. I looked at my grease-stained hands, the same hands that pulled me away from falling steel, fed my daughter through brutal shifts, and built a company standing shoulder to shoulder with the aerospace industry. Then I spoke again, drawing the final line between us, each word deliberate and heavy. Tomorrow, I'll show you my world. I hung up, no hesitation, no added explanation. Outside, the snow kept falling, but in my mind, the gears had already begun to turn, slow, precise, unchangeable. The next morning, when Denver's sky was still covered in a pale layer of fog, I sat alone in the kitchen with a mug of black coffee. No sugar, the same taste that had followed me through 20 years at the Boulder Steelworks. In the early morning silence, I understood that last night's client risk review email from North Rock wasn't a warning, it was a summons. A type of email sent only to clients they cannot afford to lose. I picked up my phone. 3 calls, 3 people, 3 links in the chain to build a strike of justice a junior VP like Ryan Archer could never see coming. The first call was to Martha Hale, our corporate attorney. She picked up quickly. I said, I need a corporate file strong enough to make North Rock read it in a posture of fearing they'll lose us. Martha understood immediately. I listed every item: company structure, ownership docs, voting rights, compliance logs, meeting notes, and especially the contract summaries for the aerospace division. The second call was to Patricia, the CFO. I requested every document that showed the performance and risk profile of the portfolio Ryan was managing. She didn't ask why. She only said, "I'm on your side." The third call was to Victor Rowan, Director of Aerospace Contracts. I asked for a summary of every aerospace deal Northrock was holding. Victor went quiet for a few seconds and then said one sentence: "You're going to show them who actually feeds them, aren't you?" By 9:30 a.m., Caldertech was running like a steel machine freshly oiled. Martha sent over the corporate structure, highlighting my veto power on multiple strategic items. Under the shareholder agreement I signed with Carter in the early days, any decision affecting the aerospace division required my signature. Patricia sent ownership documents confirming I held 21% of the company, a stake that forced Northrock to treat me as a VIP client, one at the level that must not be lost under any circumstance. Victor sent 22 aerospace contracts worth over $240 million, all under the portfolio Ryan was responsible for. Patricia added compliance logs, including 2 internal warnings issued to Northrock for faulty risk analysis. All of it sat in a nearly 60-page file right in front of me. This wasn't the complaint file of some small client. This was the kind of file that, when a financial institution receives it, their system is required to flash red. I signed the last page, and in that moment, I knew clearly that one signature of mine carried more weight than the entire VP title Ryan loved to flaunt. At 1:12 p.m. that same day, Northrock Capital received the packet with the subject line, "Formal Concern Notice, Client Portfolio Management, from Calder Industrial Technologies, co-owner Samuel Calder." Immediately, Northrock's internal system registered. Escalated to senior management, immediate review required. They understood what it meant. If a VIP client spoke up, the career of the VP managing that portfolio was at risk of ending instantly. Ryan had no idea. He thought the night at the Broadmoor was just another chance to brag about his success. He never understood that he was insulting the one man capable of shaking his entire division with a single email. I stared a long moment at the words, "Client Risk Review," then allowed myself a very small smile. Northrock wanted to evaluate risk? Then I would show them what real risk looks like. Within 10 days after Northrock received the formal concern notice, the domino effect began to fall. At 9:14 a.m., the first email was sent to upper management. An aerospace client in a $42 million per year contract, one of Northrock's most important accounts, requested a reassignment. To outsiders, it's just a change of personnel. But to people in the industry, it means the current VP is no longer competent or no longer trusted enough to handle the account. In plain terms, a loss of confidence. Ryan was the person managing that account, and this was the first crack. By the third day, the situation shifted from cracking to complete fracture. A private equity firm specializing in aviation, one Northrock valued highly, sent notice to withdraw all portfolios under Ryan's management. Their reason was short: lack of technical comprehension. In the financial world, this is the death sentence for professional credibility. In other words, they believed Ryan didn't understand the product he was selling. By the fourth day, the entire Northrock building began to talk. The risk team, the department the whole company fears, officially opened an investigation. When the risk team gets involved, nothing is light. Every email, message, report, and portfolio connected to Ryan will be examined word by word. The remarks belittling workers, belittling technical fields, belittling clients, all become legal and reputational risks. At 3:48 p.m., Ryan was called into the glass conference room, where 2 senior managers waited. They asked about the lost client, asked about the reasons accounts were leaving, asked why a private equity firm assessed him as lacking technical understanding. Finally, the manager opened an iPad and played the clip. Ryan standing at the Broadmoor in front of 420 guests, mocking me as just a factory laborer. Those 6 seconds were enough to burn down his entire professional image. That night, Ryan called me. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. I let the phone ring. Silence not because of satisfaction. Silence because it was time for Ryan to hear the voice of the consequences he created. By the 7th day, when the investigation reached its most critical phase, North Rock sent the final document. Sharp, concise, and always a warning of major fallout. Mandatory conduct review. Ryan Archer. Anyone in finance knows, when this email appears, everything has gone beyond control. I looked at the subject line and knew the iceberg Ryan built for himself had finally surfaced, and this time no one would be able to pull him out, especially when he was the one who pressed the button to sink. That afternoon, the Colorado sunlight stretched across my driveway like a thin layer of honey. I was lying half under my 2009 Tacoma, tightening the intake manifold bolt, my hands covered in oil, the same smell Ryan used to pinch his nose at and call the scent of the lower class. Suddenly the engine of a Porsche Cayenne Turbo roared outside, then braked so hard gravel scattered everywhere. Ryan stepped out. Gone was the confident North Rock VP, who spoke like a superior at Broadmoor. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie crooked, his eyes bloodshot. He looked exactly like someone who had just lost his entire footing. "Sam, we need to talk," Ryan said, trying to steady his voice but failing. I slowly slid out from under the truck, wiped my hands on a rag, not looking at him yet. I knew this scene. A man with oil-stained hands and worn jeans was what he despised most. But today that very image made him step back. "Sit." I pointed at the old wooden chair in the garage. Ryan sat, restless, looking around the garage as if searching for answers among the wrenches and screw boxes. Then he spilled everything at once. Clients leaving, 2 portfolios reassigned, a private equity firm dropping him, the risk team launching an investigation, the Broadmoor clip circulating internally, his superiors doubting his ability. "Sam, this all happened too fast. Nobody gets hit like this in 3 days. Who did this?" I let him talk. I didn't interrupt, didn't comfort, didn't deny. I simply walked to the red Snap-on toolbox, opened it, and took out a black folder, thick but not enough to reveal everything. I placed it on the wooden workbench in front of him. He looked at it like it was a verdict. I opened the folder and flipped the first page. Calder Industrial Technologies. Internal correspondence. Ryan skimmed it. A memo from Calder Tech to North Rock. Technical aerospace terms, notes, a few signatures from division directors. All legitimate, all real. But none of it stated I was a co-owner. It only showed I was connected to Calder Tech, but not how deeply. "Sam, what is this?" Ryan asked, voice shaking. I answered slowly. "It's the thing you never bothered to understand." Ryan flipped more pages. Technical documents, internal emails about product quality checks, an old internal form with my signature in the role of authorized line inspector, important enough that North Rock couldn't ignore it, but not clear enough for someone who only looks at surfaces like Ryan to realize who I really was. His face turned pale. "Sam, you work for Calder Tech in a technical position?" I looked straight at him. "You never asked what I do. You just looked at my shirt, my Tacoma, my oil-stained hands, and you decided who I am." I let that sentence fall like a heavy stone into him. Ryan swallowed hard. "Sam, these past days, I've lost everything. But is this connected to you? Or did someone at Calder Tech? Not like me." I didn't answer directly. I told him exactly what I wanted him to hear. "There are doors. Not everyone gets to walk through. And when you don't know who stands behind those doors, you should be careful with your mouth. Ryan looked at the folder, then at me, then at the folder again, trying to piece together two fragments of truth, but I only gave him enough to know I wasn't harmless, not enough for him to know who I truly was. He trembled. Sam, please, please, help me. I don't know what's happening anymore. I closed the folder gently, but the metallic click when I dropped it back into the toolbox sounded like a verdict. Then I stood straight, looked at Ryan. This isn't the real lesson. Ryan looked up, voice small like a child. Then, what's the real lesson? I tilted my head slightly, the garage light casting across my face. The real lesson happens Monday morning. Sunday night, I sat alone in the small workspace next to the kitchen, the warm yellow desk lamp spilling over the thick stack of documents I had gathered all week. Outside the window, January snow clung to the wooden fence, reflecting the soft golden glow Colorado somehow kept even in bone-cutting cold. I picked up the red pen, the same kind I had used for 20 years, logging shifts at Boulder Steelworks, and began marking the things Ryan had said to me. Just a factory laborer? Embarrassing blue-collar. No one in finance wants to look at grease. Your class doesn't understand this world. I wrote each line on yellow sticky notes, placed them on each page, sorting them into layers. Personal insult, class insult, professional insult, and the most important one, insulting a strategic client. I knew North Rock senior management would need to see all of it. Every sentence was a piece of evidence. Every piece of evidence was a door opening into consequences Ryan never imagined. As I was organizing the documents, I heard soft footsteps behind me. Jessica. She stood at the doorway, holding the blue knitted wristband, the one I made for her when she was 5, back when her hands kept getting cold, riding her bike up the hill behind the house. I looked at the band in her hands, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to run into the shop every afternoon just to ask, Dad, can you carry me one more time? Dad, Jessica whispered. North Rock. They called me. They asked about Broadmoor. They asked about Ryan. Her voice shook. For the first time in years, Jessica looked at me as if she were realizing she stood between two worlds she never thought would collide. The blue-collar father she loved, and the finance husband she thought understood life better. I set the stack of papers down and pulled out the chair across from me. Jessica, do you believe what your own eyes see? She nodded, tears welling. I pointed at the folder. You're going to see everything soon. Jessica looked at the pages stamped with the Calder Tech logo, then at the old flannel shirt I was wearing, the same one I wore during 18-hour shifts at the mill, the day I signed the first Calder contract, and the day she was born. Dad. I should have known. I should have understood. I shook my head. No one's at fault for not knowing. The fault is in the person who refuses to know. When Jessica left the room, I turned back to the desk and continued organizing the documents. On the 34th floor of North Rock Tower, senior management was probably getting the conference room ready too. Adjusting the projector, setting water bottles, checking the attendee list, reviewing internal reports. They didn't know tomorrow morning's meeting would be the one where a VP would be stripped bare in front of them. Every sentence, every word, every act. They also didn't know the man sitting in that conference room in an old flannel shirt would be the co-owner of their biggest client. I had just finished printing the third set of documents when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Sam, sending you the full Broadmoor footage. You need to see this. I opened the file. A frame appeared, the honey gold lights of Broadmoor, clinking glasses, laughter blur, and then Ryan standing in the center of the room, raising his glass, mocking me in front of 120 guests with a voice full of confidence and contempt. Not the 6-second clip anymore, the whole thing. Every word, every look, every snicker. I stared at the screen and I knew tomorrow morning no one would be able to save Ryan. Monday morning, the 34th floor of North Rock Tower, gleamed like a scalpel about to cut into a patient who'd already lost too much blood. The executive conference room door was open, a long walnut table, 2 rows of polished black leather chairs, glass walls overlooking downtown Denver, where the high-rises reflected the early sunlight. Inside were 14 executives, 2 board members, Jessica and Ryan Archer, sitting at the far end of the table with a face pale like a man awaiting execution. I stepped into the room, no suit, no tie, no Italian shoes, just my old flannel, work-worn jeans, and the boots Ryan once mocked, exactly as I intended. A few executives stood and nodded, not out of courtesy, but because I was a co-owner of Calder Industrial Technologies, a client whose contract value could shift Northrock's quarterly reports. David, the senior managing director, gestured, "Mr. Calder, the floor is yours." I placed the USB on the table and plugged it into the projector. The lights dimmed. The first slide appeared, white letters on a black background. From factory floor to ownership. The room fell dead silent. I began. This is where I started. The second slide appeared, Boulder Steelworks, where I worked 18-hour days, covered in grease from head to toe, hauling steel hot as the sun. 20 years as a factory worker. No one in this room knows what it feels like when 3 meters of steel drops 5 centimeters from your head. Third slide. The day I signed the first investment contract with Calder Tech. Then I put $50,000, every cent saved from labor, into a tiny mechanical startup. 15 years later, Calder Industrial Technologies became a defense-grade supplier. Fourth slide. The production line glowing under the Lockridge Aerospace logo. Today, I own 21% of Calder Tech, a strategic revenue client this firm depends on. I clicked again. The next slide, Broadmoor Wedding, full video. The screen lit up with Ryan standing before 420 guests, raising a glass and saying with perfect clarity, "Just a factory laborer, blue-collar embarrassment." The packed room didn't breathe. Ryan bowed his head, knuckles white, shaking. I clicked again. New slide, audio call, full transcript. Ryan's words appeared on screen, line by line. "No one in finance wants to look at grease. You don't understand our level. I don't want my career dragged down by someone like you." Several executives exchanged looks. One board member sighed in visible disappointment. Jessica covered her mouth, unable to believe the man she chose had said these things about her own father. The next slide appeared. Character versus appearance. On the left, Ryan's Porsche, Cayenne Turbo, gleaming under showroom lights. Note, lease 2,190 month. On the right, my 2009 Tacoma, old but unbreakable. Note, paid off 11 years ago. Large text in the center. It's not what you drive, it's what you are. I looked directly at Ryan. You thought a person's value was in the car he drives. I turned to the room. I believe value is in how you treat people. The final slide appeared. Character, social image. Silence swallowed the room. I stepped to the center of the table, looked at each executive, each board member, and spoke slowly, so every word sank into the air. Northrock has hundreds of clients. But some clients are not optional, and the one rule that matters is this. No one here has the right to look down on a human being just because his hands were once covered in grease. Ryan now sat collapsed, hands trembling uncontrollably, no defense left, no voice to argue, no image of a proud VP to hide behind, only a man who had burned his own name to ash. That's when James, Ryan's direct supervisor, straightened, set his pen on the table, looked across the room, and asked the question everyone knew was the beginning of the verdict. Should Northrock keep this man? The news of Ryan's suspension hit at exactly 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, one day after the reckoning in that conference room. A Northrock employee texted me. He's not allowed back in the office until the investigation is over. 6 days later, on a razor-cold Denver morning, Northrock issued the official notice. Ryan Archer was terminated for violations of professional conduct standards and causing harm to key client relationships. No negotiation, no discussion, no fallback. The associate VP chair Ryan had bragged about, talked about like it was something everyone wished they had, was yanked out from under him so fast he didn't even have time to catch his breath. 2 days after that, the Denver Business Journal ran a 2-page feature, Class Discrimination in Finance, When Social Status Becomes a Weapon. They didn't name Ryan, but everyone in the industry knew exactly who it was about. Executives shared it, discussed it in private industry groups. Analysts debated it, and more than a few said, "This is a long overdue lesson. It's time this industry rethinks how it treats labor-class families." Ryan became the living example of arrogance meeting consequences, and Jessica, my daughter, spent nearly a week trying to face the truth. I only knew she'd packed her things when I saw her Civic parked in front of my house late one night. She walked in eyes red, still clutching the knitted blue bracelet from when she was a kid. "Dad, I'm sorry." Not the performative kind. The kind that comes from someone who finally realizes they've been standing on the wrong side for far too long. I sat beside her, letting her lean her head on my shoulder, like she used to when she was little. "You don't have to bow your head," I said quietly, but Jessica shook hers. "No, I need to say it. I let Ryan decide how I saw you. I thought he understood the world better, but I was wrong. I forgot you're the most decent man I know." I didn't hug her right away. I let the silence settle so she could feel the weight of honesty. Then I said the line any father who's been hurt, has to choose with care. Forgiving him doesn't erase the consequences. Jessica nodded, for the first time, reacting not with emotion but with maturity. "Dad, I know. I want to start over. I want to understand you better." I put my hand on her shoulder. "You can always start over, but it has to come from you, not from him." The days that followed were strangely peaceful in my small house. Jessica's footsteps in the kitchen, the soft smell of morning tea, the Tacoma starting up each dawn. No one mentioned Ryan. No one needed to. But then one night, right as I turned off the garage light, headlights swept across the slope leading into my yard. The Porsche Cayenne Turbo rolled to a slow stop. The door opened. Ryan stepped out. No suit, no tie, no polished leather shoes. Just a man crushed under the weight of the consequences he built with his own hands. He stood at the edge of the driveway, fingers gripping a single envelope. "Sam?" His voice was so thin the wind could have torn it apart. I need to talk to you. One last time." I looked at him standing there, alone under the warm gold of the porch light, and I knew this conversation wouldn't be about finance anymore, but about the man he chose to become. 6 months passed since the night Ryan stood at the edge of my driveway, gripping that trembling envelope. Denver's winter had melted, and early summer sunlight spread across the rooftops. With that warm golden wash only Colorado seems to know. Life, like it always does, kept turning, without asking who had fallen and who had managed to stand back up. I heard Ryan left Colorado 1 week after our final conversation. Not gracefully. North Rock closed his file entirely, and the finance world in Denver is small. Too small for anyone to forget the class discrimination scandal that had the whole city talking for a month. Ryan moved to Illinois, took an entry-level position at a small local finance firm, the kind of role a 24-year-old usually starts with, not someone who used to be a VP. He texted once, just once. "I understand now, late, but I understand." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because some lessons only need to be heard one time, and he'd heard enough. Jessica was different. In the 6 months since, she rebuilt herself in a way that made me both proud and quietly humbled. She found a new job, handled her own finances, learned how to detach from that image of being the wife of an associate VP, and became a woman stronger than she ever believed she could be. Every weekend she stops by my house, brings some dessert she's trying to learn, sometimes a disaster, sometimes decent, always sincere. An effort has a beauty of its own. As for me, I'm still at Calder Tech, still inspecting the production lines, still signing the compliance reports. North Rock now approaches with both respect and caution. The machines in the plant still rumble with that steady, familiar rhythm, the sound of a life built by hand, by sweat, by a stubbornness that never asked anyone for pity. Each afternoon I drive my 2009 Tacoma along the road out toward the edge of town, the faded dashboard catching the orange light, the wind carrying the faint metallic scent of far-off industrial yards. Not glamorous, not polished, but real. Still the same old flannel shirt, still the same oil-stained hands, still the very things Ryan once used to diminish me, and the same things that have kept me standing my entire life. One afternoon, Jessica sat next to me in the truck, fingers brushing the little blue yarn bracelet she knitted at 5 years old. It's frayed now, one thread loose, but she still wears it. "Dad, you never got rid of it?" she asked. I smiled, turning the wheel to keep the sun out of my eyes. I don't throw away the things that tell the truth about who I am. Jessica looked at my hands, oil-stained, steady, then at the yarn bracelet, one of the last pieces of her childhood still intact. Two opposite images, yet the same in the way they endure. They don't need to be pretty to have worth. They just need to be real. As the sun dipped behind the Rockies and the amber glow hit the windshield, I told her the one line I wanted her to carry for the rest of her life. Respect isn't something you wear. It's something you live. Then I added the final lesson. Respect is earned, not worn. And that is my story. A man with oil-stained hands, a Tacoma more than a decade old, and a life everyone assumed had only one color. But the truth is that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. Wearing an old flannel doesn't mean losing. Driving an old truck doesn't mean lacking worth. In the end, what lifts a person isn't the name on their business card. It's how they treat the people the world calls small. If you've ever been judged by the clothes you wear, the work you do, or the car you drive, leave it. So I know you're still here with me, and tell me which city you're listening from. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, and think about respect, about dignity, about the way people treat each other, hit follow and turn on notifications. I appreciate every single one of you who stayed until the last line. The ones who believe respect isn't something to put on, it's something to live. Thank you for being here with me.